So we've created our user interface in our storyboard for our first project. Now we want to hook up the button so when the user taps on it, the label will say hello. We do this by hooking up something called connections. Now, depending upon what design environment or programming environment you may have used before, you may have the expectation that when we put these controls onto the storyboard, that somewhere in a code behind file, there was a variable created for these objects. That's not the case in iOS. In iOS, we have to create the connections ourselves. And of course, there's a tool to do that. So what we want to do to begin with is we want to change this view so we can see both the storyboard and the code. So in the top right-hand side, we show the Assistant Editor. And that will show our storyboard in the left and our code in the right. We'll do a little resizing here. So we can get a better look at the user interface. And the first thing I want to do is I want to make a connection for that label. So in the inspectors area, I go to the connections inspector, which is the one all the way to the right, and I create something called a referencing outlet. And there's a little plus button, and you would think that, oh, I can just click that, but it really doesn't do much if you just click it. What you actually want to do is drag it over into your code. And you can see that I get the hint, insert outlet. And now it wants a name for that outlet. And I'm just going to give it the name label. And we'll connect that to our code. You'll note that it uses the type UI label. So in my code, it's going to be using the class UI label for any of the properties or methods of this object. So there's the declaration of our outlet for our label. Now I want to hook up the button. Now I can create a referencing outlet for the button, but that's not actually what I'm interested in. I'm actually interested in an event when the user taps the button. In particular, I'm actually interested in the touch up inside event. So I'll drag that event over, and I'll insert that action. And I'm going to call that action button touched. And the type is any object, and that's the parameter that gets sent in the event. I can actually set that to UI button, which is more specific for this object. I'm not going to be using that parameter, so it really doesn't matter. But just to let you know that you can set that type. So I'm going to connect that. And you can see that my sender parameter is UI button. That might be important in some other events. So now I have a method, and this method is called when the user touches the button. And in this method body, I'm simply going to call the label object, and I'm going to call its text property. And you can see that Xcode provides me some IntelliSense and guesses a little bit as to what I would like to do. So it actually guessed correctly that I wanted to set the text property, and I'm going to set it equal to hello. So of course that's really basic Swift code. So let's run that just to make sure that we're okay. And of course we're going to be running it in that iPhone 6 simulator again. And here's my button saying say hello. My label says starting at beginning. And when I tap on the button, my label does indeed update to hello. So we've got our Hello World application, and that's all completed. Well, let's take a look at a couple of other things while we're here in the code. By default, we get a did receive memory warning function. And that's pretty obvious as to what that does. It occurs whenever you get a kind of memory warning. In other words, the application is using too much memory and the device is running out. So in this memory warning, you can dump any kind of objects that might be taking a whole lot of memory in order to keep the application alive. I've had to use this when I've used an offline mapping application that used a whole lot of images and was very, very heavy in its layers. And I would have to, on occasion, remove a layer. So hopefully you won't do a whole lot of work with that. More likely, you'll be working with Viewdidload. Viewdidload occurs anytime this view is initially created. So if you're showing this view in an application multiple times, Viewdidload only occurs the first time that you show the application. So it's essentially a constructor for the view. There are other functions as well. And we're going to look for those overrides. And the one that you'll often use is ViewdidAppear. But you can see that we have ViewdidDisappear, ViewdidLayout subviews, and subviews are those individual controls like the label and button that we just added. The view did unload, in other words, it closed. The view will appear, will disappear, will layout subviews, and will transition in size, and will unload. So there are a number of different methods regarding the view that we're interested in, or may be interested in. ViewdidAppear occurs every time this view is shown. So if I have an application that comes into this view and then leaves the view and comes back, ViewdidAppear will occur every time it's shown. So this is useful if I've got some sort of parameters or data that are updating continuously as the application runs and may be different every time that I show the view, and I want to update things in the view depending upon that data. So that's an important one to remember, and remember the difference between Viewdidload and ViewdidAppear. So there you go. That's our first bit of code and how we can run it in a simulator. Obviously, we're going to create some apps that are just a touch more complicated in the future.